My name is Liam. I'm 30 years old and I run a digital design agency that's finally, after years of sleepless nights and ramen noodle dinners, become successful. Very successful. My parents, however, have always seen my career as little more than a grown-up playing with crayons. My younger brother, Alex, on the other hand, was their golden boy, the shining beacon of their hopes. He chose business, the real degree, and they couldn't have been prouder. So when he graduated from university, they threw a party that was less a celebration and more a coronation. The centerpiece of this event was his gift, a brand new, metallic grey luxury sedan, parked in the driveway with a comically oversized red bow on the hood. I watched as my mother cried with joy and my father slapped Alex on the back, his voice booming about his son's bright future. Then, my dad turned to me, a sly grin on his face. He announced to the crowd of relatives and neighbors that they had a little something for me, too, to celebrate a recent big contract my agency had landed. He handed me a small, beautifully wrapped box. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, was a framed, itemized invoice. It was for my entire childhood. Before I tell you how I finally cashed that invoice on my own terms, let me know where you're watching from in the comments, hit that like button, and please subscribe if you've ever felt like the ghost at your own family's table. The truth is, I'd been living with the specter of that invoice my whole life. The party was just the first time they'd put it in writing. Growing up, our house was a kingdom, and Alex was the crown prince. I was the court jester, the stable hand, the forgotten second son. Our childhood photo albums tell the story better than I ever could. Page after page of Alex on his first bike, Alex blowing out birthday candles on elaborate, store-bought cakes, Alex posing proudly with a trophy for just participating in a soccer league. My photos are sparse, mostly relegated to the background of a blurry figure looking on. I remember one Christmas when I was about 8, I got a complex model airplane kit. I was obsessed with it. I spent a week carefully cutting out the tiny pieces, sanding the balsa wood, following the intricate instructions. It was my masterpiece. Alex, who was 5, got a mountain of loud, plastic toys that he grew bored of in a day. He wanted my plane. I said no. A tantrum ensued. My mother came in, not to mediate, but to adjudicate. "Liam, be a good big brother," she said, her voice laced with that familiar tone of tired disappointment. "It's just a toy." "Let him have a turn," I protested, explaining that it wasn't a toy to be played with, but a model to be looked at. She sighed, took the plane from my hands, and gave it to a gleeful Alex, who promptly ran around the room with it, making airplane noises, before tripping and smashing it into a dozen pieces against the leg of the dining table. When I started to cry, my father told me to stop being so sensitive and that it was my fault for not sharing properly in the first place. This dynamic only solidified as we got older. Academics became the new battleground, and I was perpetually losing a war I didn't even know I was supposed to be fighting. My passion was art. I could lose myself for hours in a sketchpad, my pencils and charcoals feeling more like extensions of my own hands than simple tools. In my sophomore year of high school, I won a regional award for a portrait I drew. It came with a small scholarship and my piece was displayed in the local library for a month. I brought the certificate home, my chest puffed with a rare sense of pride. My mother glanced at it, smiled thinly, and said, "Oh, that's nice, dear," before pinning it to the corkboard behind a coupon for cat food. 2 weeks later, Alex brought home his report card. He'd managed to pull a C+ in algebra, a subject he'd been failing all semester. That night, we had steak for dinner to celebrate, and my dad presented him with a brand new gaming console for his hard work and dedication. I sat there, pushing a piece of gristle around my plate, feeling the familiar sting of invisibility. They poured thousands of dollars into tutors for Alex, into sports camps, into anything that would buff the sheen on their golden child. When I needed money for a set of professional-grade art supplies, I was told to get a job. So I did. I started washing dishes at a local diner, the smell of grease and bleach clinging to me long after my shifts ended, just so I could afford the tools of a trade they considered a frivolous hobby. The real schism happened when it came time for college. Alex had his path laid out for him, a 4-year business degree at the state university, no questions asked. His tuition, his dorm, his meal plan, it was all covered, an investment in his guaranteed future success. When I announced my intention to go to a specialized art and design school a few states away, you would have thought I declared my intention to join the circus. A degree in what? Drawing, my father scoffed, not even looking up from his newspaper. Liam, be serious. What kind of a living can you make with that? My mother was worse. She used a soft, pleading voice that was far more manipulative than my father's outright disdain. Honey, we just want you to be secure, she'd say, her face a mask of concern. Your father and I, we worry. Alex is on such a good, solid path. Can't you just get a practical degree, maybe do your art on the side? The argument raged for months. They refused to contribute a single dollar to what they called my artistic fantasy. They wouldn't even co-sign a student loan. They said it would be financial malpractice to invest in a dead end. The message was clear, my dreams were not only worthless, but they were also a liability. So I left with my diner savings, a portfolio full of drawings they'd barely glanced at, and a loan I managed to secure on my own with the help of a sympathetic guidance counselor. I moved into a dorm room that felt like a palace, simply because it was mine, and for the first time, I felt the terrifying, thrilling freedom of being completely and utterly on my own. The years after graduation were a blur of hustle and hope. I moved into a tiny, showbox apartment in a city where I knew no one. The rent was cheap for a reason, the heating was unreliable, the plumbing was questionable, and my closest neighbors were a family of very bold mice. I survived on instant noodles, cheap coffee, and the sheer, stubborn refusal to fail. I knew, with a certainty that burned in my gut, that calling home and admitting defeat was not an option. It would be that I told you so to end all. I told you SOS, the final, irrefutable proof that they had been right about me all along. During the day, I worked a soul-crushing job designing bland corporate pamphlets for a printing company. At night, I freelanced, taking on any project I could find, building my portfolio one tiny logo and one cheap website at a time. It was on one of those late nights, bleary-eyed and fueled by caffeine, that I met Chloe. She was a programmer working for a tech startup in the same co-working space I sometimes used for the free Wi-Fi. She saw me hunched over my laptop, surrounded by crumpled sketches, and she didn't see a starving artist. She saw the work. That's really good, she said, pointing to a branding concept I was developing. The lines are clean, the color theory is on point. It's got a strong narrative. It was the first time anyone had ever spoken about my work with that kind of informed respect. Chloe became my anchor, my cheerleader, and my fiercest defender. She listened to my stories about my family, her expression shifting from disbelief to a quiet, steady anger on my behalf. They don't see you, Liam, she'd say, taking my hand. But I do. With Chloe's encouragement, I started taking bigger risks. I quit the pamphlet job and poured all my energy into my freelance business. It was terrifying. There were months I barely made rent, where the power company sent notices that made my stomach clench. But slowly, painstakingly, the work started to pay off. One small client recommended me to a bigger one. A website I designed won an industry award, a real one, with a sleek glass trophy that I put on my desk where I could see it every day. I started hiring other freelancers to help me with my workload. What started in a dingy apartment became a registered business, then a small office, and eventually, a thriving digital design agency with a roster of national clients. We bought a condo together, Chloe and I. We replaced the instant noodles with home-cooked meals. We built a life, a real one, on a foundation of mutual respect and hard work. My parents, of course, remained unimpressed. Phone calls were brief and perfunctory. I'd mention a new client, a big contract, and would be met with a non-committal, "That's nice, but if Alex got a small promotion from junior account manager to slightly less junior account manager," my mother would call me, breathless with excitement, to share the news for 20 minutes. The old dynamic was firmly in place, just long distance now. Their approval was a currency I had finally stopped trying to earn. Also, I thought. Until the invitation for Alex's graduation party arrived. The party was exactly as I'd expected, a monument to Alex. A banner proclaiming "Congratulations, Alex" stretched across the front of the house. A tiered cake with a fondant graduate on top sat on the dining room table. My father gave a long, rambling speech, his voice thick with emotion, about how proud he was of his son, the business school graduate, the man with a plan, the future captain of industry. He talked about Alex's drive and ambition, conveniently omitting the fact that he and my mother had paved every inch of his road with their money and unwavering support. Then came the grand finale. He led everyone outside to the driveway, where the new car sat gleaming under the afternoon sun. To a young man going places, my father boomed, handing Alex the keys. "You've earned it, son." The applause was deafening. Alex, for his part, looked smugly pleased, as if this was nothing less than his royal due. It was then that my dad, still playing the magnanimous host, called me forward. "And let's not forget our other son, Liam," he announced. "His little company just landed a big project. So we got him a little something to celebrate, too." He winked at the crowd as my mother handed him the small, elegantly wrapped box. My heart, against my better judgment, gave a pathetic little flutter. For a split second, I allowed myself to hope. Maybe this time, it would be different. Maybe this was a real acknowledgement. I took the box, my hands fumbling slightly with the ribbon. Inside, on a cushion of black velvet, was a small, gold-plated frame. And inside the frame was the invoice. "Childhood expenses," the title read, in a crisp, business-like font. It listed items like room and board, 18 years, contribution to useless art degree, and even a line item for emotional labor, dealing with artistic temperament. At the bottom, a grand total was listed, a ridiculous 6-figure number. And underneath that, a handwritten note: "Consider this paid in full by your brother's success." Just kidding. Mostly, a wave of forced, polite laughter rippled through the guests. My parents were beaming, so proud of their clever, hilarious joke. I looked from the invoice in my hands to the luxury car in the driveway. I looked at my brother, who was smirking. And in that moment, something inside me didn't just break, it vaporized. I didn't make a scene. I didn't yell or throw the frame on the ground, as much as every fiber of my being wanted to. I simply smiled, a tight, thin smile that didn't reach my eyes, and said, "Wow. You really shouldn't have." I found Chloe, who looked like she was ready to commit a felony on my behalf, and we left without saying goodbye. The drive home was silent. I just held the ridiculous, insulting frame in my lap, tracing the glass over the printed words. The joke wasn't that they'd given me a bill for my own upbringing. The joke was that they thought it was a joke. They genuinely saw our lives as a balance sheet where Alex was a blue-chip stock and I was a junk bond they were humorously writing off. For 2 weeks, I heard nothing. Then, on a Tuesday morning, my phone rang. It was my mother. Her voice was light and breezy, as if nothing had happened. "Liam, honey, how are you? We missed you after you rushed off the other day." I didn't play along. "I'm fine, Mom. What do you need?" There was a slight pause. "Well, it's just that your father and I were talking. We've run into a bit of a temporary tight spot." I could hear my father muttering in the background. She continued, "You know that investment your father made? The one for the new housing development. It seems it's not going to pay out quite as soon as we'd hoped. Things are just a little leveraged right now." I knew what leveraged meant. It meant they were broke. It meant they'd overextended themselves, likely to fund Alex's lifestyle and that ridiculously expensive car, and now the bill was due. "What do you want, Mom?" I asked again, my voice flat. "Well, honey," she said, her voice dropping into that familiar, wheedling tone. "We were just thinking, with your business doing so well, maybe you could help us out. Just a short-term loan, to tide us over." That was it. That was the moment the years of quiet resentment and swallowed pain finally boiled over. I took a deep breath. "A loan?" I said, my voice dangerously calm. "That's interesting. I actually have an invoice here for services rendered. Perhaps we could start by settling that." My mother was confused. "What invoice, Honey? What are you talking about? The one you gave me at the party, I said, the words coming out like ice chips. The one for my entire childhood. The one that was so hilarious. Let's talk about that balance sheet, Mom. Let's talk about the investment you made in Alex, the tutors, the camps, the university tuition, the brand new luxury car, and let's talk about the investment you made in me, which, according to your own accounting, was a net loss. The line went silent for a moment. Then my father grabbed the phone. Now you listen here, he barked. That was a joke. My God, can't you take a joke? After everything we've done for you, you're going to throw a gag gift in our faces. A gag gift? I laughed, a real, bitter laugh this time. You handed me a bill for my own existence in front of 50 people while my brother stood next to a $60,000 car you bought him. That wasn't a joke. That was a mission statement. You've been telling me my entire life that I wasn't a worthy investment, and you finally put it in writing. So, no. I will not be giving you a loan. My useless art degree, the one I paid for myself by scrubbing grease traps, is now the only profitable asset in this family, and this asset is officially closed for withdrawals. The fallout was immediate and predictable. There were tears from my mother about my cruelty, my lack of gratitude. There was blustering rage from my father about my disrespect, how I was ungrateful and had forgotten where I came from. Alex even sent me a text, "Wow. Heard you're letting them sink. Some son you are." It was a masterclass in gaslighting and emotional manipulation, a greatest hits album of all their classic tactics. But this time, it was like watching a movie I'd seen 100 times before. The words had no power. I knew the script. I knew the ending. And I was finally ready to write my own. I let them exhaust themselves, and then I laid out my terms, not as a son begging for love, but as a businessman closing a deal. I will not give you a single cent, I said, my voice steady. I will not bail you out. I will not pay for your financial mistakes or for the car you couldn't afford. Here is what I am willing to do. I will pay for 3 sessions for the 2 of you with a certified financial advisor. He's a professional. He will help you create a budget, figure out how to downsize, and manage what you have left. That is my one and only offer. The financial support ends there. Then I took a breath and delivered the final term. A personal relationship with me is also conditional. It requires respect. It requires an apology. Not for the joke, but for the sentiment behind it. Until you can understand what you are apologizing for, we have nothing more to talk about. I could hear the stunned silence on the other end of the line. The power dynamic, the one that had governed my entire life, had just been completely, irrevocably rewired. I was no longer the supplicant. I was the one holding the invoice. Life after that phone call felt quiet. For the first time, there was no low-level hum of anxiety in the back of my mind, no waiting for the next dismissive comment or the next act of casual favoritism. There was just peace. Chloe and I got married a year later, in a small ceremony on the coast with our chosen family, the friends who had seen me, supported me, and celebrated my success without an ounce of jealousy or condescension. My parents were not invited. I heard through the grapevine that they had to sell the house I grew up in and move into a small condo. Alex had to sell the luxury car to cover his own expenses, now that the bank of Mom and Dad was permanently closed. They never took me up on the offer of the financial advisor. Pride, I suppose, was more valuable to them than solvency. About 6 months after the wedding, I received a letter. It was from my mother. It was stilted and awkward, full of justifications and explanations, but buried in the 3rd paragraph were the words I thought I'd never read: I am sorry. We were wrong. We let our own fears and ideas about what success should look like blind us to the son we actually had. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. I haven't seen them yet. The relationship isn't magically healed. The trust isn't rebuilt. But the boundary is there, solid and clear. I learned that you cannot make someone value you. You can only set your own price, and if they're unwilling to pay it, you have to be willing to walk away from the deal. My success was never about proving them wrong, it was about proving myself right. And that's an invoice I finally paid in full, to myself. So I want to ask you guys, have you ever had to set a hard boundary with your family to protect your own peace? Let me know your stories in the comments below. And as always, thanks for watching.